Welcome to FloriCAST, the podcast for greenhouse growers. FloriCAST is brought to you by Greenhouse Grower Magazine, in conjunction with the University of New Hampshire, North Carolina State University, Kansas State University, and Cornell University. Thanks to this podcast sponsor, Fine Americas. This week's podcast is from Brian Whipker of North Carolina State University.
Welcome to this podcast discussing plant growth regulators. PGRs are invaluable tools to help control excessive plant stretch, but did you know about the additional cost savings provided by using PGRs? Today I will share with you some of the economic advantages of using plant growth regulators to improve your bottom line. Economic benefits. Chemical costs are the primary concern to growers. This is certainly a variable cost associated with using plant growth regulators. The growth controlled with PGRs allows for a tighter plant spacing. Thus, there is a less square foot per week cost and a lower fixed cost assigned to the pot. So we need to evaluate if the fixed cost savings is greater than the variable cost of the PGR application. To provide an example, let's use geraniums. These geraniums are grown in a 4-inch square pot. For this geranium crop, it will be grown for 10 weeks. 4 weeks the plants will be spaced pot-tied at 4 inches by 4 inches. The final 6 weeks the plants will be spaced 6 inches by 6 inches. So let's calculate the amount of space the crop uses. This is how we will evaluate the amount of fixed costs that charge to each individual pot. At 4 inches by 4 inches, the plant takes up 1/3 of a square foot times 1/3 of a square foot. So the 0.33 times the 0.33 equals 0.1089 square feet. Then times 4 weeks of growing time equals 0.436 square foot weeks. At the 6 by 6 inch spacing, the plants take up half a square foot by half a square foot. So the 0.5 times 0.5 equals 0.25 square feet times 6 weeks of growing time equals 1.5 square foot weeks. Adding up the numbers together gives 1.936 square foot weeks of growing time used for each individual pot. So what difference does a PGR application make? Here's some data from an experiment we conducted. When bonsai at 10 part per million was sprayed onto medallion dark red geraniums, the plants were 6.4% shorter and 16.7% smaller. When it comes to space allocation, we are interested in the change in diameter. Smaller diameter plants can be spaced closer together. So let's calculate the improved space efficiency provided by the PGR application. It is impossible to improve the space utilization when the plants are spaced pot-tied at 4 by 4 inches. Having smaller sized plants will only affect the space utilized after the plants are spaced at 6 by 6 inches. So having 16.7% smaller plants means the plants will only take up 83.4% of the space. We use that number and multiply it against the 1.5 square foot weeks. Thus, with the tighter pot spacing, it will only take up 1.687 total square foot weeks to grow the crop. So let's do the cost comparison. Square foot per week cost normally varies with the size of the greenhouse. Ideally, you should know your own cost. For our example, we will use the cost of 15, 20, and 25 cents respectively, which are representative of a large, medium, and small size greenhouse. Without a PGR application, a single pot occupies 1.936 square foot weeks of space. So the total fixed cost assigned to a single pot would equal 29 cents, 37.8 cents, or 48.9 cents respectively for a large, medium, or small size greenhouse. With the tighter spacing possible with a PGR application, the fixed cost per pot is lower at 25.3 cents, 33.7 cents, or 42.2 cents respectively for the large, medium, and small size greenhouse. The difference is the savings offered from the tighter pot spacing when using a PGR. It equals 3.7 cents, 4.8 cents, or 6.2 cents per pot respectively for the different size greenhouses. So now we will calculate the cost of applying the PGR. When one calculates the chemical cost of spraying 10 parts per million of bonsai based on $100 per quart, then the cost to treat 9,000 pots would be less than $5, and the cost to treat an individual pot would be less than 1/10 of a cent. For our example, labor costs were not included. The time it takes to apply a foliar spray would be small. Thus, the savings add up. The savings provided by the increased space efficiency would be $37, $48, or $62 per 1,000 pots respectively for a large, medium, or small size greenhouse. In summary, there are economic benefits besides controlling excessive stretch when it comes to PGRs. PGRs allows for tighter pot spacing, which then translates into an increased profit per pot. Cost savings makes the use of PGRs a key component when it comes to best management practices for floriculture crops.
Thanks for downloading this episode of the FloriCAST series, and thanks to our sponsor, Fine Americas. Help your plants shape up before they ship out with proven PGRs from Fine Americas. Manufactured under the strictest ISO 9001 standards, Fine PGRs offer uncompromising quality, superb growth control, and unbeatable value. Visit fine-americas.com or call 888-474-3463 for a distributor near you. Come back next week for the next edition of the Floriculture Podcast series.